The Mandalorian is a Western. In fact, The Mandalorian is a spaghetti Western, which is my favorite kind of Western. Spaghetti Westerns use the backdrop of the West as a place to go through transformations which are largely about individualism, even rugged individualism. Westerns are typically also about man versus nature. The people in a Western are always pretty formulaic. The bounty hunter, the prostitute, the bank robber, the wise Indian, the brutalized campesino, and so on. The enjoyment of watching a spaghetti Western is mainly in the realization of those characters. We know what we think a bounty hunter should be like. He should be a grizzled man with no name, so deep into intense situations that he's forgotten himself and yet always having a plan. He should be an expert marksman. In fact, his weapon skills are exceptional. He has shaman level knowledge of fighting and capturing people and surviving. And perhaps he should have a heart of gold as well. So when he goes up against similar bounty hunters who are not so friendly, and they get gunned down, we don't feel like it's such a big loss. I can't give you an audio comparison just for copyright reasons of the Mandalorian's voice in comparison with Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name character, but they sound very similar to me. And there's a dry wit about both characters in their dialogue. Clint Eastwood doesn't have to wear a mask, obviously, but he does produce a steely-eyed look when required, which is as good as a mask. The other basic elements in a good spaghetti Western are well-defined plot goals, such as an upcoming bank robbery or a hidden cache of gold coins worth millions, which only one man knows about, who is now dead, but he revealed the secret with his dying breath in exchange for some water, something like that. So the spaghetti Western also is normally going on within the backdrop of social and political upheaval, which just adds to the chaos and mayhem and creates the rationalization for the extremes the characters are going to go through. The final element of a spaghetti Western, just to round it out, is the beauty and wealth of the natural environments of the open West, which was a wild place where the only law was manifested by Mother Nature, but also by a sheriff who is not very effective except to bury the rapidly rising pile of corpses as the shooting proceeds. The natural beauty of the scenery is intended to transport us. It's like if you go on a vacation and the scenery puts you in a different headspace than the familiar surrounds of your office or town back in civilization. So the spaghetti Western is an adventure movie, and we participate in that adventure when we watch one. The Mandalorian presents another element, which is the admixture of a different genre, which we can identify in part by the fact that the protagonists wear armor. The Mandalorians themselves are a group of like-minded, somewhat militant, testosterone-fueled fighters in hiding. And if they show themselves, they may become targets of the authorities. So they stay down in the sewers, which seem to be very clean sewers, considering. But the sewers are not really sewers. They are the underworld. And the Mandalorian covert is led by a sort of Hephaestus figure, a helmeted woman who arbitrates their disputes and who is a sort of spiritual leader, because she possesses the craft required to make and maintain the Mandalorian armor and the weapons they use. Hephaestus was the Greek god of metal and perhaps also of technology, and Hephaestus used a forge. So if you watch the Mandalorian sequences with the armor or with the sound turned off, it's easy to see or imagine that that character is quite masculine. The mane that she wears is analogous to a lion's mane, which is something the male lion possesses, not the female. She also has those pointed spikes on her helmet, which are quite masculine in form, and the other Mandalorians, even the biggest ones, don't have those. So it would have been easy to imagine this character was male, but perhaps was female in order to make the Mandalorians a bit less frightening. This is Disney after all. A true Hephaestus figure would be lame or have some other physical deformity as a compensation for the great gift of technical prowess. and would also be smarter than everyone else around them. And this last part does seem to be true of her. We also learn that being a Mandalorian is a creed. That is, the Mandalorians are not a people from a given planet. What they have is not a shared phylogeny. It is an ontogeny that they have chosen for themselves. This is the way, and the reliance on a teacher or guide to arbitrate the meaning of the way with its martial philosophy means we are in the presence of a kind of chivalry. So the Mandalorians are knights. They have clan heraldry. They've even taken vows in exactly the same way the Arthurian knights of the Round Table took vows. Arthur's knights also avoided sex in order to remain pure and be true to their vows, as the Mandalorians do. The Arthurian legend had a Christian component, which is the desire of the knights to, in the words of the once and future king, perform some ordinary miracle to heal a blind man or something like that. This feat is going to be achieved magically through the knight's purity and excellence. And there's a close connection between the strength of the Mandalorian and his vows. And this is in keeping with the traditional morality going back at least to Samson, if not to Lancelot. So the Mandalorian probably believes that due to his discipline, his keeping to the code, there will be a reward. And that reward in the Arthurian legend is connected to Christ, in the sense that Christ is a supernatural being who is capable of performing miracles even as a baby. So the key scene in The Mandalorian is when the baby Yoda levitates the rhinoceros creature. By the way, this creature is sought out and killed exactly in the manner of an Arthurian quest, in case you had any doubts. The egg, which the Mandalorian finds and brings to the Jawas, is basically an Easter egg. It means the same thing as a Christian Easter egg. Easter eggs represent the empty tomb of Jesus after the resurrection. So the man with no name goes into the cave, and after killing the monster, he reclaims the egg, which refers back to the resurrection. And the Mandalorian needs resurrection. His ship has been destroyed. He's seeking redemption, probably from some hidden guilt about surviving the death of his parents. Meanwhile, the narrative says the Jawa simply want to consume this rare Easter egg treat, which is kind of ridiculous. The real meaning of the encounter is that the baby Yoda is revealed in all his glory, his power, and the Mandalorian eventually realizes that he has witnessed something remarkable, and I suspect associates it with the Mandalore, that he is witnessing something very special which has become possible due to his observance of the way. But that does not happen immediately. He needs some time to process what has happened, to realize he cares about the baby Yoda in just the same way an Arthurian knight would take time to eventually appreciate the baby Jesus. You can see even in the name, which is not from the narrative itself but was provided spontaneously by everyone on the internet almost instantly, that the baby Yoda is a kind of Christ figure. And I don't mean that in the Jungian sense or even in the traditional sense, although that's also true, but I'm talking about the strictly Arthurian sense that a child is pure when it's in pain or distress, such as about to be experimented on by an evil scientist from an evil empire. A knight has a duty to help, irregardless of any other consideration. Someone in pain in the Arthur legend must be helped, especially if it's a maiden or, in this case, a helpless child. With respect to the genre issue, even in bounty hunting, the hunter with the heart of gold can exist. And in Sergio Leone films, we learned that the man with no name does indeed have a heart of gold. The proof that the Mandalorian is not focused on greed, perhaps as much as we would expect, is that he took a fortune in Beskar, and instead of just spending that fabulous wealth on himself and retiring, which any intelligent bounty hunter would do, he gives a lot to the armorer and continues on the way. He even insists that some of it should be used for the foundlings. In actual fact, he's driven by this code of honor of his creed, and his goal is very much the Arthurian goal, which is that might does not make right, and force should be changed and transformed into a kind of defense of the people. Force should be applied to help people. That's why the plot in the episode about the refuge which is taken directly from Seven Samurai, kind of makes sense, because the Mandalorian has been converted into this knight who has the intention of helping people. This is also emphasized by the Mandalorian's origin story, where he's saved as a child, and that is shown in the flashbacks. It's true that they harp on his distrust of the droids, but I think that's a mistake a little bit in terms of the narrative's integrity, because the fact that his parents were murdered was a function of the lawlessness and war that is going on for years and years. And this idea that the war is the source of all their troubles is expressed by one of the central figures in the story, the client, who is the one very intent on getting hold of the baby Yoda. Of course, Werner Herzog elevates any story he cares to participate in due to his acting prowess. All of that, which you can see in the character of the client, the way he steals every scene that he is in, is simply due to Herzog's understanding of the basic power of acting, which is a creative power. And, perhaps some of the other cast members could learn from him. But when you see Herzog on screen, we immediately experience a level of depth which is almost out of place in a spaghetti western. So he is part of the other deeper thread of the narrative, the Arthurian part, I think. He regrets deeply the warfare, which is also Mando's own ultimate goal, to somehow put a stop to the violence. But the client's path is intentionally one of power and control. He acts almost slavishly as an agent for Moff Gideon. And the Mandalorian is a contrast to that path. It's interesting when the Herzog character is not surprised or puzzled or angry by the Mandalorian taking so much wealth and converting it into a mere suit of armor, because he sees it as a beautiful indigenous craftsmanship. He not only understands what it is, he understands the cultural context of the Mandalorians, what it means to them. And yet with all that, he's made himself into a slave of Moff Gideon. He is killed by Moff Gideon almost without a thought, just brutally wiped out, just brutally rubbed out. The Moff Gideon character exists because in Star Wars we have to represent pure evil, and evil has to have a face, even if that face is a mask, as with Darth Vader. Star Wars is built on a mythology about the dualism of good and evil. It's a Manichaean way of looking at the world. You are either seduced by the dark side and riddled with evil, or you are pure and you're one with the Force, which is good and emanates from all life. There's not a lot of room for ambivalent characters, and when those are introduced, they do seem to fall flat. There is a relationship between technology and evil in Star Wars, which carries over to the Mandalorian. So, for example, the droids who killed Mando's parents are evil technology. They're killer droids. Moff Gideon is shown with a kind of dark sword, which is not a Jedi lightsaber, but something similar in power. The Death Star, which Darth Vader describes as a technological terror, keeps coming back in the Star Wars movies in one form or another, because the idea it represents is the total control of an entire world, like a quantum of a living world, through evil technology. That is symbolized by the line, that's no moon, that's a space station, in the first Star Wars film. So technology is mostly evil in Star Wars, actually. The good technology, like the Millennium Falcon or the Mandalorian's own ship, which is described kind of as a bucket of bolts, is very much a product of love and craftsmanship to keep it going, which is what the Ugnaught, Quill, talks about at various stages. The Amy Sedaris character, Peli Motto, is also a craftsman. The Jawas steal technology, but they don't destroy it, and so on. So we have good technology, which is represented by positive, loving, and wise characters. And then we have evil technology, which is wielded by utterly monstrous, evil characters who do not value life and destroy it for no reason, or perhaps what is worse, try to subvert it and corrupt it. And so they have really bad intentions for the baby Yoda. It's as if you were to take the baby Jesus and subvert that power in some terrible way, So I'm going to reserve some things I noticed about Taika Waititi's character IG-11 because I think questions about technology are really interesting and deserve a much more detailed look than I can give here. If you appreciate this kind of content, please subscribe to my channel. It is the YouTube way after all. Thanks.